Recording in progress.
Welcome to the Louisville, Colorado City Council meeting of Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. Calling the meeting to order and asking the city clerk to do a roll call, please.
Mayor Maloney?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton? Here. Councilmember Hefner?
Here.
Councilmember Lay?
Here.
Councilmember Most?
Here.
Thank you. Would you please all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to ask the city council if they would like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Next, we'll have public comments on items not on the agenda and items on the consent agenda. If you want to make comments, please fill out a comment card. But I have one. It's Sherry Summer. Oh, and Sherry filled out the polling public comments, and your person is here. So Sherry has 6 minutes to make comment. Thank you. Sherry has 6 minutes.
Take all up all that time. Sherry Summer, 910 South Palisade Court. I wanted to make some comments on the workshop you had that I attended on April 18th. And I just wanted to make the observation that either meetings are getting a lot more interesting or there's something wrong when I'm making comments about meetings that I found interesting. They're just that good. So anyway, the meeting was about the comprehensive plan and getting prepared to go through that process. And just for the audience who wasn't there, the first part's reflecting on topics that will be most relevant to our community, and the second part is reflecting on how we discuss topics and reach conclusions. And the idea was that red teams, or teams where people can voice honest opinions and bring up ideas that challenges the status quo, are the most healthy. Healthy teams are places where members can show up authentically. And I just think that's so important to have that idea in place before we go into the comprehensive plan. At the end of the day, we want the most forward-looking ideas, and that's going to be based on reflection and not just agreement. I decided to talk about this tonight because I was listening to an interview with Trevor Noah this morning that cast a little bit of a different light on this, and it's just so compelling. I love these ideas, and I feel like they're really important. He was talking about interviewing people that he doesn't share agreement with, and why he does that, why he chooses to do that. And I think that there were several points that he brought out that highlights what's really important in the meeting that you attended. The first goal he has is to bring people at home into the space where he's doing the interview. And that's really important for the comprehensive plan, that not everybody can attend meetings, but that this becomes a place where people become engaged. And his goal is to create a connection. We think about red teams, and we think about dissent, and red kind of means like anger or fear or something negative. And what he said was that really grabbed me, is he said, I'm not selling anger. And we won't be selling anger here either during the comprehensive plan. Calm will be the best. He makes a choice to have conversations with people of diverse viewpoints that don't agree with him. And he does that on purpose. And here we do have different viewpoints, and we have to make a choice. We can be in the same room, but engagement is a choice. And so it's great to set the stage in this way. The next thing he said that I thought was important is that he said, I don't see this as a persuasive exercise. I see it for an opportunity for growth and learning. And he said, if you spend too much time in your own world, you only know what you know, and you believe it, and you reinforce that. When you meet someone who doesn't agree with you, They force you to challenge your beliefs, and in the challenge comes galvanizing. And that's why I engage with people I don't agree with. I'm not trying to persuade everyone. I'm looking at this as a form of self-improvement. And then he said, engagement pokes holes in my arguments, and then I go away thinking, why do I believe that? Why do I say that? Can I make that stronger? Can I reinforce what I believe? Or is this now a view I have to question as a whole because I'm just parroting what some people have said? He talked about the 2016 election being a turning point because that was a time when interviewing became much more serious. And that's a point that I think we're at too, between the Marshall Fire and the drought and growth and all the things we're facing. We do have to be serious. And fear could be a natural reaction to change. But with this idea of red teams and conversations and engagement, I think we can go much farther and connect with people who have different and similar views. And I just wanted to, I wanted to say thanks to Councilmember Hoffner and Hamilton, who are so new on this and are so well prepared and I learn something new every time you speak, even though you're just fresh. And I appreciate all that hard work, and I appreciate the experience and hard work of the older members, the more experienced members. And finally, I wanted to say a big thank you to Councilmember Most, who I really think could write a book on red teams, who works really hard to, and that's a compliment, by the way. I'm trying to say that as a real compliment because it's not easy to challenge the status quo. And people can take a lot of heat for that, and yet that's what we really need. We need people who are able to do that and to do so intelligently as you do, Councilmember Most. And so I want to say, I think we're off to a great start with our council, our staff, city manager, and I think that we really have a chance to do excel at creating a very good comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Does anyone else have public comments on items not on the agenda or items on the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll go on to the next item, which is the consent agenda. Just one thing, staff has noted there has been changes to the agreement included in item D. And the new agreement was shared with council this afternoon, and a copy is included in the packet addendum. Are there any changes to the consent agenda, or does someone want to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
Any discussion, comments? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. That approves the consent agenda. Now we'll move on to council informational comments on pertinent items not on the agenda. Do any members of the city council have comments? All right, well, you're making this easy. Seeing none, we'll move on to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. Council knows this already, but for the community and the public that's here, our just recently departed Deputy City Manager Megan Davis last week received the Deputy City Manager of the Year award. It's kudos to her, obviously. It's kudos to the organization and council's support and the community. So congratulations, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to regular business. So the first item is Older Americans Month proclamation. I've asked the Mayor Pro Tem, Deb Fahey, to facilitate this particular item. So,
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, so I will begin by reading the Older Americans Month proclamation for May 2023. Whereas includes a growing number of older Americans who contribute their strength, wisdom, and experience to our community. And whereas communities benefit when people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds have the opportunity to participate and live independently. And whereas Louisville recognizes the need to create a community that offers the services and supports older adults may need to make choices about how they age. And whereas Louisville can work to build an even better community for our older residents by not limiting our thinking about aging, exploring and combating stereotypes, emphasizing the many positive aspects of aging, inspiring older adults to push past traditional boundaries, and embracing our community's diversity. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of Louisville, Colorado, that May 2023 is proclaimed to be Older Americans Month. We urge every resident to celebrate our older citizens, help to create an inclusive society, and accept the challenge of flexible thinking around aging. And before we move on to anything else, I would like to acknowledge, we have two people from our senior center, the director of the senior center, Katie Beasley, and Katie Tofty also, here to represent the senior center. And I gotta say, I've been involved with the Louisville Senior Center since, like 2005, I think, was when I started working there. And it is just doing amazing things for the older Americans in Louisville. The most significant thing, I think, is the opportunity through the lunch program to give them a healthy meal every day of the week and socialization, which are the two really critical things that seniors need to age in a healthy and happy way. So I would like to invite Katie, one of the Katies, I guess, to announce some of the events that are coming up for Older Americans Act at the Senior Center. So
I will do it. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Fahey. I'm Katie Beasley. I am one of the two Katies that work in the center. So usually people start with me since I'm the first office, and if I'm not the right person, I send them along to Katie Tofty, our resource coordinator. But for May, Older Americans Month, we actually have 3 events this month, one specifically for celebrating Older Americans Month, and it is on Wednesday, May 24th. At 5:15 p.m. We are going to do an evening event this year, being that it's still light out past the 7 o'clock hour, and we're hoping we'll be able to capture our usual senior that comes and maybe a working senior that would want to come and celebrate with us. We'll have African entertainment, a drumming ensemble, which is going to be really lively and fun in the building, so it'll be great. And then this Saturday, we have an art reception to celebrate our painters that come to the center every Wednesday. And then we also have a plant sale on May 20th, which is very popular, and it starts at 8 a.m. until sold out. So if you want to register for the dinner on the 24th, you can do it with us at the center or online at louisvillerecreation.com. Thank you.
thank you for everything you two do at the Senior Center. It's amazing what gets accomplished. Also, if you're interested in more of an expansive view of aging in Louisville, the Boulder County Area Agency on Aging Advisory Council will be meeting, is it this Friday or?
There's a meeting this Friday, and we're hosting it at the center. It starts at 9 a.m.
Right, and anyone in the public is welcome to find out what's going on countywide. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Mayor Pro Tem, I feel like you're going to make a motion to approve this proclamation.
I will move to approve this proclamation, yes.
Do I have a second? Second from Councilor Lay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We will move on to item B, resolution number 25, series 2023, a resolution approving an amended plan unit development for sign waivers for Speedy Sparkle Car Wash located at 1414 Hecla Way, Lot 6, Louisville Plaza, filing number 2. And I believe our Director of Planning is going to be giving us a presentation.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, members of City Council.
Excuse me just a
Yes.
minute. Are there any disclosures on council? Seeing none, sorry to interrupt, please.
No problem. Good evening again. I'm Rob Zuccaro. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. I'm going to be presenting on this requested planned unit development amendment. This application actually started in 2019, and in early 2020, it was heard by our Planning Commission. Soon after that, the pandemic hit, and we went to all electronic meetings, and this applicant did not want to move forward with electronic meetings, so they wanted to wait until we were back in person. Certainly, we've been back in person for a while, but they have just kind of gotten their final materials together, so that's the reason why it's taken so long to get to City Council. But with that explanation, it's also helpful to know what code we're reviewing this under. We did amend our sign code in 2019. At their request, when we went to Planning Commission in 2020, they wanted to stay under the code that they applied under, which was our Community Development Design Standards and Guidelines. We had our sign regulations within that document. So we've continued that, even though it's a couple years later, because that's how Planning Commission reviewed it. So just a little bit of context that's why this is not reviewing it against our existing sign code, but I'll provide some background on that. So here's a site plan of existing and proposed signs on the site. There are 2 proposed signs. So this is Speedy Sparkle Car Wash, which a lot of you may be familiar with, which is located just east of the King Soopers on South Boulder Road, north of South Boulder Road. And they've been in operation for quite a few years now, and we approved an administrative PUD for them to do their regional development. But since then, they've wanted to added some signs. They've actually added some directory signs in this location, which do require some waivers. They weren't aware of that when they installed them, but I'll go over those waivers. It's really just related to lighting. And then they wanted to install a secondary sign on Hecla. So this is the north side of the site. Hecla, South Boulder Road is down here. There's an existing car wash sign on the building, which the city issued a building permit for. It had never been approved through a sign PUD, but we issued a building permit. It complies with all our codes, but we had them add it just so we had a complete package. And then they actually share the monument sign here with the King Soopers filling station and then Grease Monkey. So all 3 entities shared this sign. The proposal that went to Planning Commission in early 2020 actually included a revision of this sign. Since that time, they've decided not to pursue a revision to that sign, but that would have required a waiver as well. So really, we're looking at waivers for a new monument sign here facing Hecla, and then these signs here. So this is the sign facing Hecla. There was a previous PUD. You probably saw the whole history going back a long time. There was a previous monument sign approved, which required a waiver. It was never installed, but in any case, our code in the CDDSG says you can only have 1 monument sign for if it's a single building on a single lot, a single commercial building. So otherwise, it really complies with our current code. But under the code from before 2019, it did say you can only have 1 monument sign. So this would be their second, so it requires a waiver. It's internally illuminated, cabinet. Our sign illumination standards say that you can only illuminate through the logo and the letters, so that's how this is intended to be installed. So these menu board signs, these are internally illuminated, and each of these panels, they're fully translucent. That actually doesn't comply with our code, so that's the waiver that's being requested. So our old code and new code has that standard. Everything complies other than that under our old code. The new code does limit these types of signs to 7 feet in height. So again, we're not looking at a waiver under the new code, but that would potentially be a waiver if this was under the new code. That's the existing sign that's been there for a while. Again, no waivers or approvals needed for this. We just wanted to add it to the sign plan. I've already mentioned kind of what the waivers are that we've needed here. And here's some information just on staff's analysis. Staff does find that it meets the standards for waivers for a PUD sign amendment. And I'd happy to answer any questions about that, but I won't go into any detail just for time. Again, Planning Commission did recommend approval of this back in early 2020. There were a couple of conditions. Those conditions have been met. Staff is recommending approval as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does council have any clarifying questions on the presentation? Mayor Pro Tem.
I have one on the sign that they're proposing from Hecla, is that to provide a sign from the people that are coming from the north, from like the north end subdivision?
Yeah,
to
yeah,
come
the
down?
applicant can speak to that more, but my understanding is that this is just kind of a wayfinding sign so that, people are, as you're entering the car wash, you actually have to come around to Hecla to get into the car wash. And so this identifies, where you're coming into the car wash, but they can speak more to that.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilor Hamilton. Everybody's getting promotions tonight.
So question about the canopy sign. No changes there are being proposed at this point in time. In our code, are there any requirements for lighting for that, or if that can be lit at night, et cetera?
We do have design standards for lighting. So these types of signs with internally lit letters are allowed under our sign code. We do not have time restrictions on sign illumination in our sign code.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from council? All right, does the applicant have a presentation, Director?
Yes, I think they wanted to at least stand for questions, and they may have a statement. I'll see what they
right.
what they want to say.
Thank you.
Hi, y'all. My name is Iona Carney, and I'm the operations manager at Speedy Sparkle Car Wash. Thank you guys so much for hearing us. I really appreciate it, especially since it's been so long since we came before Planning Commission. I'm just here to answer y'all's questions.
Any questions for the applicant? All right, seeing none? Thank
Awesome.
you.
Cool, thanks.
Next, we'll go on to public comments. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Please tell us your name and if you're a Louisville resident. Does anyone, I don't have any cards on this, does anybody either on Zoom or in City Council chambers have comments? I do have one, so on Zoom we have Ron Shepard.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Diane Shepard, and I am a Louisville resident on St. Andrews Lane. The only comment that I'd like to make about signage, which is across the board, my opinion with new development, is that we should be considering dark sky, too much illumination at night, too much illumination that's blaring out further than it needs to. With anything that we're doing in the city, I just would like to ask that we continue to keep those standards in mind. I don't really know how that's addressed in any code and such that's actually officially on the books right now, but it is something that's important to a lot of us, not to have these glaring lights, going at all times. It's just not healthy for any of us or the environment. So I just want to make that comment in general as we continue to do new building or upgrading and that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll go to council questions and comments. So Director Sicaro, could you address that question?
Yes, so our sign code from 2019 has several illumination provisions. First and foremost, on a cabinet sign, we don't allow the whole cabinet to be illuminated, like I mentioned. It has to be opaque other than logos and letters, and that helps limit the amount of light. For externally lit signs, so signs that have a light shining on them, we only allow downlighting. We don't allow uplighting of signs, which is best practice for dark skies.
Thank you. Other council questions and comments? Let's see, am I going to just call you Councilor Most or?
You call me anything.
Councilor Most.
Okay, thank you. I just have a general question. I'm fine with this application. to Director Sicaro about going forward with the comprehensive plan this year, and I'm hoping that as part of that, and we've talked about this on the council, looking at what the comprehensive plan is like and what the implications are for updating codes. I'm hoping that as part of that, we'll look at signage as well. It seems to me that some of the regulations, and I know some of this is 2019 and some of this is older, tend to kind of be about the image and view we had of our community 20 plus years ago, and I just think it's really important to support the business community to make sure that we're thinking about the needs of businesses so that they can have signage that they need to promote their businesses. I mean, we have a lot of development in this town which really pushes stuff off the main streets and kind of hides businesses behind trees and bushes, and I understand the motivation for doing that, and I'm just hoping that as part of the comprehensive plan, and I know you have so much expertise, we can think about what it means to modernize the way we think about signs to reflect supporting our businesses and really being successful as we go forward.
Thank you. Other comments? Are you ready for me to close the public hearing? Okay, well, close the public hearing. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Councilor Most.
Oh, I have to read this whole thing. I haven't actually done that before. Okay. I make a motion that we pass resolution number 25, series 2023, a resolution approving an amended planned unit development for sign waivers for Speedy Sparkle Car Wash located at 1414 Heckler Way, Lot 6, Louisville Plaza, filing number 2.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, City Clerk, you want to do a roll call for us, please?
Mayor Maloney,
Yes.
Councilmember Lay,
Yes.
Councilmember Most,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner,
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That passes unanimously. Next, we'll move on to regular business item C, flock camera program update and purchase request. And I believe the interim police chief, Jeff Fisher, will be giving a presentation.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Jeff Fisher, your interim chief of police, and thank you for having me tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about our flock camera program and provide an update to you and a recommendation. In 2022, council approved the purchase of 25 flock automated license plate reader cameras. And the purpose of that was for them to be used in the Marshall Fire burn affected areas as both crime deterrence and as added security measures there and investigative tools in the event that we did have crime. That original purchase authorization was for 25 cameras, and the original purchase order consisted of 20 cameras. In the time that we've used them, for approximately a year, we've really seen surprising results from those cameras. In April of this month alone, those flock cameras logged a total of 27,082 license plate reads. And without any more information, I mean, that's just the total number that they read, which I was astonished. There's just a lot of activity in those areas. And of those 27,000 reads, 107 of those had associated what we refer to as hot list information attached to them. So there was something connected to that vehicle and that license plate in the Colorado Crime Information Center. So it could have been a stolen vehicle, it could have been a wanted person associated with that vehicle, it could be a missing person, it could be an Amber Alert, it could be any host of things but that are associated with those. And in the packet, and I won't go through all of these just in the interest of time, I just listed a number of incidents where those flock camera reads, those license plate reads, provided valuable information to us, and really in a number of instances where we wouldn't otherwise be able to do it. If somebody's fleeing from us or We just generally have a hard time identifying someone that we're looking for suspected of a crime. And I think probably the seminal incident that I would point to as a reason that these cameras are so successful, or if you remember, when we had burglaries at Busaba Restaurant, Lamar's Donuts, Luca Coffee, and Precision Pours Coffee. That was a series of burglaries that occurred really all in the same evening. And that one of our flock license plate reader cameras identified a license plate, which in conjunction with other investigative means and other law enforcement agencies in Jefferson County, we were able to identify a suspect in those burglaries and obtain a warrant for his arrest. That suspect had committed in the Denver metro area in total over 40 burglaries and was kind of a serial burglar and was on probation for burglary at the time. And we had literally zero information about the suspect in those cases. So without that flock camera read, that person may very well still be at large. So that's probably the best example that I can give you. With the warmer weather and of course an increase in construction in our burn-affected areas, there's just a lot of activity there all the time, both day and night. And we are seeing some increase in crime in some of those areas. The Coal Creek Ranch neighborhood just recently had a handful of criminal incidents there where building supplies, materials, equipment have been stolen. They've expressed concern to us and a request for additional cameras in the community. We have heard the calls for additional cameras from other members of the community, citing similar reasons. These cameras are not without controversy, and this is not lost on us. So I just want to briefly touch on what these cameras do and what they don't do. So the flock cameras are automated license plate readers. So they register license plates as they pass the camera. The cameras do not photograph occupants of the vehicle. They don't photograph drivers. They don't collect data about the vehicles. It's not a crime analytics tool, so to speak. It literally is just something that tells us, hey, this license plate was in this location at this time. So they're not surveillance cameras. It's not a surveillance camera type of system. And I just want to clarify that because I understand there is some concern about that. And they don't provide anything close to that. What we're proposing, and in an attempt to meet both the calls from the community for additional cameras and balance that with other concerns from the community in terms of the implementation and the use of these cameras, we think that we can find a happy medium and what our recommendation would be to fulfill the remaining 5 cameras that were authorized in the initial purchase last year. So we're requesting purchase of 5 more pole-mounted or stationary flock cameras, similar to the ones that we have deployed now in the community, and 1 mobile, for lack of a better word, camera that we can place in areas if we're having a rash of thefts or motor vehicle thefts or catalytic converter thefts or burglaries or something. They do offer a camera that is mobile, essentially. So we can place it in an area if we need to capture license plate activity coming in and out of that area. What we're proposing, and let me go through the slides here. So in this slide, these are the current locations where we have the cameras deployed right now. These are all the cameras authorized under the initial purchase and the locations of where those are in the community. And again, you will see that most of those are deployed in the burn-affected areas or adjacent to the burn-affected areas as designed. What we're proposing for these additional cameras, these are the locations here where we're suggesting these may be useful. And the reason we selected these locations is because these are major and common ingress points into the city. So what that does is the crime that we have in Louisville, most of the crime here, is not committed by the good people of the city of Louisville. It's committed by interlopers from other communities. And they usually come here in cars. Now, I understand that's pretty anecdotal, but I can tell you that's really just kind of the truth. It's not our people in this community victimizing our own community. So by positioning those cameras, when we do have an incident, if we have a robbery or a burglary or a motor vehicle theft or whatever, especially in the middle of the night when there's less traffic, in which a time when a lot of crime does occur, those people are going to enter our community at one of these, probably at one of these locations. And in doing so, that will give us a starting place, just like it did with the burglary, the series of burglaries that we have. It gives us a starting place. It gives us somewhere where we can begin an investigation. This is not a tool that, again, it doesn't conduct analytics or provide crime analysis, and what it doesn't do is a lot. What it does do well is what it's designed to do, which is gives us a starting point to conduct an investigation. So the first location here on this map is northbound McCaslin Boulevard at Dillon Avenue. The second one would be westbound Dillon Avenue at 96th Street. The third one is westbound Dillon Avenue at 104th Street, westbound South Boulder Road at 95th Street, and then southbound McCaslin Boulevard at South Boulder Road. And again, just for that location, I would mention we had a couple incidents where had we had a camera there, it would have been very helpful. One of them was an incident in which we had a concrete truck dump a whole load of concrete down McCaslin, and I can see that some of you are familiar with that. As I'm explaining that, we have not identified the driver of that concrete truck yet, and if that camera were there in place, we probably would have had that wrapped up by now. Another incident occurred last October when we had a shooting incident on McCaslin Boulevard, and we believe that vehicle spent some period of time on North McCaslin and very likely either came or went through that intersection. So again, those are just two examples that illustrate the point. These photographs here on the PowerPoint, Scott Moore took these for us, and these are just suggested locations or possible locations where we have pre-existing poles in place where we could mount these, so there would be no cost to have a flock pole or have a special pole inserted or mounted. This is the one westbound Dillon Avenue at 96th Street. We've also had a couple incidents, unfortunately, at city services, one of which when an employee's car was stolen, and another incident in which an employee's car was broken into and items were stolen. This would have been useful in those cases as well, we believe. There are two different locations. There are two different options for this camera at Dillon at 104th. And again, there's an existing light pole there and then an existing light and traffic pole, and that's what those illustrate. And then here would be a possible location for westbound South Boulder Road at 95th Street. Just when you turn westbound there onto South Boulder Road, you're probably familiar with that location as well. And then I think this is our last one. This is the southbound McCaslin location that we're suggesting right when you turn southbound onto McCaslin from South Boulder Road. This would be the area, the direct area where the concrete truck dumped all the concrete. This picture is a Falcon Flex camera. So this is the one camera I mentioned that is a mobile or location flexible, as Flock refers to it, a location flexible camera that is not permanently mounted to a pole. We can move that around. So again, if we have a series of crimes in a certain area, that would be a useful tool in identifying vehicular traffic in and out of that area. So again, this information just touches on how this looks, kind of what the picture the camera takes, and what this camera picks up and what it does not. So it focuses on license plate and the vehicle. There is no facial recognition component to these cameras. These cameras do not identify people to any degree, passengers or drivers in vehicles. There are prohibited uses for these. We also attached in the packet is our license plate reader policy at the police department, which really is very restrictive. And in a nutshell, that policy just outlines that these are not to be used for anything other than obviously legitimate law enforcement purposes and through the identification of vehicles and not people. And the data retention is 30 days, and then it runs over it. So there is no permanent data retention for these. This is not an intelligence database that we utilize. It doesn't, again, what it doesn't do is a lot. The price of the flock cameras has gone up. So in the initial purchase of these in 2022, those cameras were $2,500 a piece. Those same pole-mounted stationary cameras are now $3,000 a piece, and that involves a 2-year term contract, similar to the contract for the initial 20 that we deployed. The Falcon Flex camera is a little bit more at $3,500 per camera. That's why we're suggesting the purchase of only one of those, and then there's that same contract price. To place those on existing poles for the stationary cameras, the price is significantly reduced from what it would be if Flock had to place one of their poles and then mount the camera on that pole. So with, again, the photos of the pre-existing poles, it would also be a lot more cost-effective than going Flock's route. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions from council on the presentation? Yes, Councilor Most.
Thank you, Interim Chief. I just had one question I wanted to clarify. You said that we have 2-year contracts on these cameras. So if we installed new cameras, the 2-year contract would be from the new date of installation, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the current contract for the existing 20 expires in April 2024.
Okay, and then if just ask one other question too.
Sure.
You mentioned that the way the system works is you're only scanning license plates and you're looking for associations with those license plates. Are we talking about traffic tickets and outstanding warrants, and what's going to bring up a hit on a license plate?
Great question. Thank you. There are a couple different ways that this works. So law enforcement can enter hot list information. So if they're looking for a vehicle, if it's say it's associated with a carjacking, and they have a suspect or suspects, they believe they're associated with car ABC and it has this license plate. They can input that into the system. So if that license plate passes by one of the cameras, either in Louisville or elsewhere, it will alert that jurisdiction of its presence. So the other thing it can do, and Scott may have to help me with the terminology, it's our officers, they can set them to, what's it called? They do it at night when it's the motion activation setting.
Motion sensor type setup. So we can set up essentially it'd be a hot list for all vehicles that enter into that area. And what that's used for is in those burn control areas where we know there is no activity or no one living in those areas, we can set the hot list at that point to be all activity. So from a certain time point where it might be 1 a.m. until 4 or 5 a.m., then it just alerts an officer somebody's there. They can then go into that area and just check to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah, it sends a notification, a license plate entered, past this camera. And if we know that camera is in this neighborhood, then the officers can go, well, that's interesting because there's nobody living in there and it's under construction. So we better go check that out because there's really no reason for someone to be in there in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Scott, could you just tell everybody your name and your role with the police department?
Absolutely. My name's Scott Moore. I'm the crime prevention specialist and the PIO for the police department, public information officer.
Thank you very much. Councilor Most, did you have anything else?
No, not this time, thanks.
All right, so next we'll have Councilor Hamilton, and then we'll have Mayor Pro Tem Fahey, and then we'll have Councilor Hefner.
Thank you. One clarifying question to help me understand some of the definitions here.
Sure.
So in the slide deck, you talked about a prohibited use as traffic enforcement. So help me to understand one of the examples given in the packet and if it fits under traffic enforcement or not.
Sure.
So it was a traffic complaint of a vehicle that ran a school bus stop sign. We were able to find the vehicle using Flock
and summons was issued to the 17-year-old driver. Is that a traffic enforcement?
No, I would say the bus driver provided witness information that then we were able to corroborate with the flock camera. So for example, if the bus driver calls and says, yeah, it's a blue Subaru and it ran the stop sign, I didn't get the plate, it was a young person driving, then in that instance, really the probative value of the violation is provided by the bus driver. The camera just gives us a starting place where we can go to talk to the person or find the person who was driving the car, so then we could take the same enforcement action that we would be able to take had an officer been there at the scene.
Okay, so it's a prohibited use to pull someone up in the database to enforce a traffic violation, but it's not a prohibited use of this technology to use the technology to follow up on a complaint of a traffic violation.
Yeah, again, the cameras are a starting place. They provide license plate information from vehicles that are on public roadways as a starting place for if you're looking for XYZ that occurred in a certain location, this vehicle was at that location at that time, then we would have to investigate that to determine if the vehicle or the information that the camera registered in terms of the license plate being in the area at the time, if that matches information that we got from an independent source. What these do not do is these are not they're not red light cameras or speeding cameras or things like that.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, so I'm just going to
Sure.
repeat back to you what I'm hearing. So these cameras can be used to identify license plates that had a traffic violation if someone called in for that traffic violation.
Well,
Someone else speak up if I'm not understanding this correctly.
Yeah, maybe I'm not understanding the question. If we get a report of a law violation that occurred, we would utilize any available investigative resources or tools that may provide information to lead us to someone responsible for that. For example, if we got a speeding call, if it's not the car running the school bus sign, for example, if we got a call from a resident who said this car is speeding up and down my street, and I've got a camera on my house, or I have a Ring camera or whatever, and it has a description of the vehicle, and it's I can give that to you, and that might point you in the right direction. Then we find the vehicle based on that. I mean, I think it would be similar to that. The cameras are not. They're not traffic cameras. I mean, that's not what they're for. They're to identify license plates. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Okay, so is traffic enforcement more of like running red lights type of thing? So that's why this kid running the bus stop sign was different?
I think the purpose of the cameras are not for traffic enforcement. I think that's probably an isolated incident where there happened to be a camera right there where that occurred. So the officer utilized that as an investigative tool to identify a vehicle associated with the incident that occurred. But they're not, I mean, we don't utilize the flock cameras as traffic enforcement tools. I can't think of another incident where that would have occurred.
Okay.
So I mean, that's not the focus of the cameras.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't review the information in the cameras looking for traffic violations, if that helps.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, because they were originally set up with the intent of helping fire victims
Sure.
ensure their safety and well-being. So the use of it remains focused on that.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Fahey.
Actually, I think my question was mostly answered. I'm wondering, of the thousands of hits that you get on them, how many do you actually look at? Do you only look at them if it's a license plate number? For example, the 107, I think you said in April, that were already identified as being involved somewhere else?
Yeah, that was the hot list hits, and
Yeah.
those are the 107, where information was in the system about those license plates in particular, so it registers when the camera sees it. So we follow up on all of those. If we have a criminal episode that occurs in a certain area, then we would go back to see what vehicles were in that area during the time that that crime occurred, to see if that leads us to a starting place or leads us to a suspect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but no one is, I guess, to expound on that, no one is poring over the data from the cameras every day or anything like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Next up, we have Counselor Hefner, and then we'll have Counselor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the really good report and presentation. I found the list of examples to be helpful in understanding what we're talking about. So my question is, when this was approved in 2022, it was really focused on the fire areas, right, the burn areas. And now, from your presentation, it seems like maybe we're expanding that scope. Is that just sort of general law enforcement purposes? Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate. That's our recommendation, yes.
And do we feel like the 20 existing cameras sort of appropriately cover the burn affected areas? Are the 5 additional cameras doing the most possible for the problem I feel like we're all most concerned about, which is theft from the burn affected areas?
I think they would augment that, certainly. I
Yeah.
think they would augment those cameras, certainly, and address other concerns about just crime in the city in general that we're hearing from community members. I think it's kind of a combination of both.
So let me see if I can ask that a different way. Are there alternatives, or did you consider alternatives as to whether there are more placements within the burn affected areas that would sort of prioritize that over the sort of general law
I
enforcement
understand, thank you.
purpose?
I think the burn affected areas are pretty well covered. That's where all of them are now, all 20 of them. So honestly, I think they're pretty well covered. I don't know that I would recommend the placement of more of them in those areas.
Okay. And then as far as the term, I know you answered a question before about the 2-year term. Is the idea to sort of reevaluate after that 2-year term, or how's that decision-making process look?
Yes.
Okay. And then just one other thing, I think you mentioned in passing something about other jurisdictions, and if there's an entry in another jurisdiction, does that mean if, Westminster or Denver or wherever has somebody they're looking for, can they search our cameras?
Well, what they would do is they would enter the license plate as a plate of interest in the Colorado Crime Information Center database. Not necessarily in the camera itself. I might ask Scott Moore to help with the answer to this a little bit, because he really is our subject matter expert in terms of more technical questions.
The answer is yes. So they can search our cameras. They do. We have partners with other municipalities that do have these. Broomfield has them, Boulder has them, Lafayette has them, Erie has them, and the list goes on. There's 193 cameras that I currently know of that are within the state of Colorado. But when we've made partnerships with other departments, other agencies, we've also had them agree to our policy in order to be able to share that system with them.
Okay. And I assume we get the same sharing in return?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
Counselor Dickinson?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I have a few questions. I think one of the things that's, I hope, right, is when, for instance, there's an Amber Alert and we all get on our phone and looking for this vehicle with this license plate, my assumption is that plate is being entered into this system, and any one of those 190 cameras in the state, if that car happens to drive by one of those cameras, it's likely to pick up that plate number, right, which would be super helpful. And I could see why having cameras that are major intersections or major exit and entrance areas would be helpful in locating a license plate of interest. Then there's the more just sort of normal, there's a stolen plate, right? And so it may not be as emergent, but if any camera sees this plate, that seems like really great information. So a car just drove into our community that is registered as a stolen vehicle. That's great information for police to act on. And I think it's similar to, police car driving around town and looking at plates, looking at other things, and certainly being able to enter that in. But a human's going to have a hard time looking at a plate and being like, let me enter that into the system and see if it comes up. So if you pull someone over, you do that, but you have to have a reason to have already pulled them over. Whereas this camera is just looking at plates, and is looking for hits that are entered into the system. But again, they're not. It isn't. So it isn't as Chief was saying. It's not a traffic camera. It's not gonna see what speed you're going, or that you ran a light, or that you did something wrong, and then signal to the police, hey, somebody just broke the law. You should follow up on it, right? But if you hear someone broke the law, if somebody runs into a stop sign somewhere, and you have a camera at that intersection, you could go back and look at that camera and see which car, which plates. But so again, I guess I'm failing. I'm struggling a little bit. Because we've had a lot of theft in the burn areas, or more theft, but we don't seem to have caught anyone in the burn areas with this technology yet. And so, we have some fire victims that are like, oh, please say yes to this. We need more cameras. We need to catch these people who are doing this, but we're not going to add cameras to the area. We're going to add cameras for the people coming and going. But if car X comes into our city, that doesn't trigger anything. And if car X comes into a community, that doesn't trigger anything. And then if car X steals some lumber, puts it in its trunk and drives through, that doesn't trigger anything, because unless that car is already on a list. And so the only way we're going to catch someone in this scenario is saying, okay, what time was it stolen? Let's look at all the plates that the cameras saw during that time period, and then what do we do with that information? Like, compare those plates against known criminals, or like, we're not going to just, it doesn't give us a warrant, right, to check. I mean, what happened with the Lamar's Donuts burglar was that plate came up to an individual who was a fugitive or was a suspect. I guess I'm just missing how this is going to work, how this works. And how these cameras actually are used to catch people for what we're trying to catch them for. And that's not even about the 5 we're adding. I'm trying to understand the 20 we have, and what our pattern of use is, and how we try to solve crimes that have happened with the technology. So I realized I kind of went in a few different directions, and I apologize. But if you could help me, understand. What's the hope? What's the best case scenario if someone steals some copper from one of our work sites, construction sites?
Yeah, I think you brought up a couple really important points. I think the first point is the limitation of what these do, and I think that speaks to kind of some of the privacy concerns about these. Like I said earlier, what these don't do is a lot. They are an investigative tool when we have an incident. It's something that we'll look at just like we would look at surveillance camera footage of a nearby business. If we knew they had cameras and we thought the suspect vehicle drove past there, we may check with them to see if they have footage that would be valuable. It gives us a starting point, and so it would say, okay, there were in this time frame when you think this occurred, these 8 vehicles passed through there, and then we can kind of start from there, right, and look into each of those vehicles, and if 4 of them are compact cars and 3 of them are motorcycles, and then one of them is a large flatbed truck, and they stole siding or wood or trusses or something like that. We pretty quickly get to the flatbed truck as being somebody we might want to go talk to first, right? As opposed to the people driving the compact cars. So it's just it provides investigative information that we can then use to follow up on and or corroborate with other intelligence information or suspect information. Like in the case of our burglaries, that's essentially what happened. We communicated with our law enforcement partners in Jefferson County who had a person of interest in some of their burglaries. They knew what vehicle was his vehicle. When we knew that vehicle was in Louisville on the date and time that we had the burglaries. We were able to kind of connect those pieces of information, and then things went from there. So it really is not a single source of anything other than being a source of information, an investigative tool to point us in a direction, in addition to being a crime deterrent. And that's really the idea. Where these cameras that we have deployed now are mounted, they come with signs that clearly say there are license plate reader cameras in use in here. And the idea of deterring crime is far preferable than using it as an investigative tool in a reactive manner to solve the crime that already occurs. Now, we don't know what we prevent, but I think the fact that we haven't had far more criminal incidents in those burn-affected neighborhoods than we have, I think, kind of makes the point that it is effective as a crime deterrent. But it's absolutely got limitations. It is not a panacea by any means.
Yeah, I guess what's funny is when I read the packet, this seems like it seems surprising this is in front of us, right? We approved 25 cameras for X amount of dollars, and you guys bought 20, and you're asking to buy the last 5, and it's, because it's a year later, it's a little more like, okay, cool. So you're just asking for a few more $1,000 because the price has gone up, but it's not new. It's not a new request. We approved 25, you bought 20, you're trying to buy the last 5. So it seems a bit much to be in front of us to ask for these 5 cameras. But here we are having this conversation, and I'm not super impressed with. I think part of that is because they are limited, right? They're just noticing the comings and goings of license plate numbers. And so, as far as an investigative tool or otherwise, it is a little bit limited in its impact. You really have to sort of already be a criminal to have your license plate trigger any sort of response. And if you aren't already a criminal, then you're just another license plate coming and going. And so there's very little privacy issue, but maybe so much so that it isn't super effective. I'd love to see, reports of more, finding more thefts and being able to identify the cars that were involved in those thefts moving forward. But you're really asking for cameras at intersections that are going to really more pick up on maybe the best intent of the cameras in the first place, which is someone just came into our town with a license plate that's on a hit list. And so that's really important for our community, that as cars come into our community, we are noticing cars that we should be noticing based on actual information, like you said, not picking up the driver or what they look like or what their behavior is, but the license plate has a history, and now we can see that. So I actually think these 5 might be more useful. They're just not so much necessarily useful for the burn areas. So I'm fine approving this, but I do think, if someone asks me why, I think it doesn't have a lot to do with the fire for me.
Can I add one more thing just as a clarification for his question? There's also an assumption if these cameras are not picking anything up as they leave those burn areas, that they're leaving the burn area. So these also help us to identify that maybe the theft might be internal within the community, meaning either contractor to contractor, but it's that investigative tool at that point. So it doesn't necessarily mean it passed the camera if it is a theft.
All right, so we have Counselor Lay who has some clarifying questions, and then we're going to go to public comment.
Yeah, I think I want to pick up on one issue. What I understand from this is we really ought to disentangle, well, the primary reason for this is not the burn area. It is, it sounds like it's more general crime control in the city.
Yes.
Okay. And that's, and I just want to make sure I understand that, because that's, when this came before us in its earlier incarnation, we had very specific issue in mind, and this is building, it sounds like building on your experience, confidence in the technology to assist in other areas in the city.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I
agree.
Is that fair to say? I mean, I just want to make sure I.
Yes, I think so.
You're not here, you're not here trying to roll something through the fire victim door or fire survivor door. You're just talking about a technology that we've used for that could also be used for a different, just a different area of.
Yes, I think that's very accurate.
The second question is, have we gotten any requests from other jurisdictions to add these?
In terms of access to our camera data, or do you mean?
No, I mean, for example, I could see where, and I'm just making this up, that a jurisdiction might say, gee, these two communities, which are on each side of Louisville, both have flock cameras, but Louisville doesn't. It would be helpful to us and, you know, the crime control in the region if we were able to pick up, you know, somebody, or, you know, if we were trying to solve a crime where we thought people were moving along a particular road, or we might find that or we're looking for stolen cars on a particular place, that it would be, you know, part of helping our neighbors by having that. And I'm wondering whether, I don't know whether conversations like that occur between law enforcement of like, gee, would you add these or not? That may not be the reason for doing this. I just am interested in, have there been those kind of conversations at all between you and other neighboring communities?
Yeah, we talk to our neighbors about what everybody else is using and doing all the time. I would even offer that conversely, if we were the only community that didn't have any of these cameras, it might have the opposite effect, because it wouldn't take long for the criminals to figure out that they've got safe haven to hide out in Louisville because everybody else has cameras and Louisville doesn't. So it could have that effect too, which we don't want, of course.
I do administer the system, so I get a lot of those phone calls from other jurisdictions. I have not had anybody ask me specifically to put in cameras, but I have had phone calls from other jurisdictions asking me if we have cameras in specific locations to aid in one of their investigations, and we have not had those at this point.
And one other question is, this is just sort of general knowledge that you have about criminal behavior, that is how people steal, I'll say construction, because I'm still looking back at what we did a few months ago. This kind of a flock camera, I understand if people are not, if they're not driving into the burn area, if they're on foot, or if they're driving over the land without going past them, it's not picking up anything.
Correct.
Right? And,
Correct.
and it's not supposed to. That's not the point. So it sounds, you know, for that, again, there's no particular effect, or may not be any particular effect. Is that the way that kind of crime typically takes place? Do you have a sense of whether there's
Crime usually occurs through opportunity. And if you can deter an individual up to 2 to 3 minutes from committing the crime they want to commit, then they'll go somewhere else to do it. And so they're not going to want to drive over roads. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be somebody who sticks out. So they do follow usually the norm to get to those places where they're going to commit their crimes.
Well, and without going into too much detail, we just had that occur in a neighboring jurisdiction, if I'm remembering correctly, where that jurisdiction understood the suspects were intentionally taking routes because they knew there were no cameras on those routes. And they learned that on the back end of, this wasn't a Louisville case, this was another jurisdiction, but I think that speaks to the deterrence value that Scott mentioned.
I got it. You think if there's anything, I think that's my questions. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Interim Chief. We're going to take public comments at this point in time, but rest assured we'll probably get you back up here.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So next is public comments. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Please tell us your name and if you are a Louisville resident. And I have one sign up, Tanya Samaru. And we do have people on Zoom who also have comments.
Hi, I'm Tanya Samaru. I'm a Louisville resident. I own property in one of the fire impacted neighborhoods. So I just want to say that the people in the fire impacted neighborhoods have agreed to this. The rest of Louisville has not. You have not gotten the consent from the community to surveil them all the time in their comings and goings through Louisville. 27,000 license plates recorded per day on a database owned by a private company. You know, don't tell yourself, oh, they only keep it for 30 days. Like, you can't believe the things they can do with this data, and nothing prevents them from doing it. Most of the public doesn't know that you're talking about creating a system of mass surveillance in Louisville that the police department has access to. They do not know that. And I think you should go back and have a dialogue with the public about that. I want to point out that the police chief in Louisville is not elected, and that person is hired and supervised by an unelected city manager. So you are the electeds, and you should not authorize this without putting very careful guardrails on it, because, you know, I don't think that some private company needs a record of every time I drive to Safeway to buy toilet paper. You know, like, there are consequences for these sorts of things. I think the police are using a little bit of scare tactic here. I'm not impressed by the results that they report in the memo. No thieves have been caught in the burn areas. Now, I'm going to say the burn areas, people want those cameras, and they just feel better having them. So whether maybe they deter theft, they don't help catch thieves so far, fine, whatever. But outside of those areas, I don't want to live in a town that has cameras everywhere, and because most people, only one person's driving a car. You know, don't say, oh, it's just a license plate number. Most of the time, someone's driving your car, it's you. And so that means that the police have that information. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable. I think you need to go back and have a dialogue. I don't think you should be approving this contract right now with the wider community, because all they know is that you have these cameras approved for the Marshall Fire areas. This is a scope creep. And I think you're going to catch people out by surprise, and that's not okay. I think you should wait. We have a new police chief coming too, and that person can be part of the new dialogue as well. I don't think there's any reason to approve this right now. I ask you to please go back, ask the public for their feedback before you say yes to something like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in City Hall to make comment from the public, I'm going to move on to Zoom. So we have Thomas Wade.
Good evening. My name is Tom Wade, and I'm a 32-year resident of Coal Creek Ranch, 1017 Turnberry Circle. I'm also the Coal Creek Ranch HOA president, so I'm representing the entire community there, both the 162 homes that lost everything, as well as the other 2/3 of our neighborhood that were left intact but still affected by everything that happens. I found this to be very informative. I've learned a lot. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all the city leaders, the mayor, the council members, the police, the police chief, all the officers, the safety officer. They've all been so responsive and helpful to us and have given us great comfort through this time. And I did listen to a lot and I did learn a lot, but I will say this. I know for a fact that, keep this in mind, now that the weather is warming, the amount of homes that are starting almost daily now is going to really intensify over this next 6 months. So I think the activity is really going to intensify. I did appreciate the comments that the cameras are already there, but I do think that the additional routes, it all makes sense to me. And as far as the surveillance goes, the privacy, if these help, it sounds to me like they will help subsidize the cameras that are already in the burn areas for the major routes. And what I took away from this was, yes, as the burn areas, we don't want to have people have theft because it's not only maybe dollar value, but we're worried that it could cause delay. It might cause a family a week or 2 weeks delay of getting home if materials have to be replaced. So anything that's going to help any of this is going to be welcome. But also, as somebody that's lived here for 30 years, one of the reasons I think that we all want to are so anxious to return to our homes in this community that we love so much. And the reason we love it so much is because for the last 30 some odd years, I know that myself, my family, and my neighbors haven't spent much time worrying about crime in Louisville. And unfortunately, aside from the fire victims themselves, this whole rebuilding effort is going to bring a criminal element to the whole town. So the whole town is going to suffer for this as far as bringing an element to the town that wouldn't otherwise be coming to town. So it seems like the last comment I'll make based on everything I've heard is that it almost sounded on the last comment as if we're just debating on whether we're going to do this or not. And I think I understood that this was already approved, all 25 cameras. And the only reason that this discussion is taking place is because of the additional costs since for purchasing the last 5. So, not only above and beyond the burn part, I want all of the community to be safe as possible. And I think I'll end it by saying that I don't care how many times you guys see me come and go in and out. I'm not worried about it. I don't think you're really that concerned. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate all efforts to help us. Bye.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? So we have, next up is Rick.
Yes, my name is Rick Ratajczyk. I am a resident of Louisville. I am in the burn area along Centennial 8. Kind of agree with Tanya. I am concerned about, like I said, Louisville becoming a police city, police state. She did make a statement that is very true. Data does not easily disappear. I agree that we should take a look and ensure that the rules, the service level agreements are being adhered to by the company who is holding on to this data. Additionally, I do have one of the things that the other thing I just wanted to say is I think I'm more concerned. I'd rather see a lot more effort put into getting more police officers in these areas, because from my experience driving in the areas, watching our homes go up over there, there's not enough of a police presence there. So I think cities should work on getting some well-trained, well-educated police officers in the area. One other thing that I wanted to mention about these plate reading cameras, and this is something that I've seen in, I believe it was in Pennsylvania, they would read plates along a highway. And if that plate triggered further on down the line, they were able to verify the speed that the person driving on that highway was going. So again, I'm not endorsing speeding. I just want to let you know there are uses for those cameras that may in the future end up I don't want to become a police state or police city where we just have to constantly worry about whether or not we're being monitored. It's not a question of have I done anything wrong? It's a question of whether or not someone thinks you've done something wrong. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, we will bring it back to council. And I'm the only one who hasn't commented, so I'm going to take the opportunity to go first. You know, we had some, debates about this. I get that opportunity, right? We had a lot of these discussions when we approved these initially, and there was a lot of concern in the community, certainly in the areas where the burn areas were. And I think we took all those very seriously, and we did talk about privacy. We did talk about, is this surveillance or not? But that's not really what's before us tonight. I think there are really two issues. And one is, do we approve additional cameras? And that's what we're being asked. If we want to talk about the police department's policy around this and, policy that we believe should be adhered to, that's where we can weigh in on that. But that's not the question before us tonight. I think that some of the things that were mentioned about retention, how it's shared, when it's shared, those are some things that we should discuss as a council, and we should give direction to staff if we feel that there are policies that we believe need to be adhered to. And it's interesting. I was out of town last week, and when I went into the parking structure, it said, your license plate is being read when you go in, and it's read when you go out. So this is happening a lot of places. It wasn't taking my picture, but it was taking picture of the license plate to know which vehicles are coming and going. So this is becoming more and more prevalent, and it is a tool. In that case, it's a tool of knowing where those vehicles are, because if something happens, then they have a record of that. But the question before us tonight is, and what staff brought us, was a request to purchase more cameras. I am okay purchasing more cameras. I think they've been used appropriately by our police department. But I certainly would entertain in the future, if council so chooses, to have a policy discussion about the police department's policy around this and talk about some of the things that are within our purview and control. Things about retention. How long do this get retained? And, I know there are municipalities that have things like this, and they retain for minutes, not for days. We can have the pros and cons of that. And those are the kind of discussions I think we need to have, to address some of the concerns, and that should be open for the community to weigh in on those things. But that's not what's before us tonight. So what's before us tonight is a request to purchase more. If we want to talk about policy, then we should have a policy discussion. But I'm prepared to support what's before us tonight. Other Councilor Most.
Thank you. And I just want to say I appreciate all the comments of my fellow council members and the members of the community, and I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with the mayor, because I think what we're looking at tonight is something within the vernacular around this called function creep. Whenever you're dealing with identity-related technology, and yes, these are license plates, and we're talking about cars, we're not talking about people, but there's a tight correlation. We're talking about personally identifiable information, because there's only 2 drivers in my house that drive my car. And I think what we're being asked to do tonight is to extend the mandate. That was certainly my understanding of the mandate that we discussed when we discussed these initial cameras. I'm open to having that discussion, because I think it's something that we need to discuss as a community, and as some of our community members said, it shouldn't just be the council, it should be a community discussion. But I'm concerned with the intent and the purpose of these additional cameras. And when I read over the package, this was my concern, which is my understanding when we approved this, and I was a very strong advocate of approving this, because from my perspective, this was a way to extend our police resources. We have an excellent police department. We have fantastic professionals. And like every other police department, we're also competing now for people. And my concern was I didn't want to overextend our police department by trying to provide police presence 24/7 in the affected areas. And so that's why I said, yes, I think these cameras are a good idea, because they're going to augment they're going to extend the capabilities of our police. But I think what we're being asked tonight is to say, well, what we found by installing these cameras is we've been able to look at a lot of different types of crime that's happening in the city. And from my personal perspective, is that is a different mandate than the mandate I signed up for when I agreed to this. And again, I'm not opposed to having that discussion. I think that's a valuable discussion, and I think, as the mayor said, we need to be clear about policies, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this because I don't feel like we're just extending, certainly what I voted for when I voted for this, whenever it was we voted for this, was it a year ago? I can't remember. So that's kind of where I feel like this notion of function creep is something that is a real important topic in any kind of, applying any kind of tech like this, and I think we have to be very, very careful about it. Thank you.
Councilor Hefner?
Yeah, thanks. Councilor Most, I agree with you, and I think I also see the decision in front of us similar to you. And I'm pretty uncomfortable with expanding the program from a very sort of targeted and tailored deployment of these cameras in the fire neighborhoods to basically, I mean, in some ways, the 5 busiest intersections in town, right? I mean, to me, that's a difference in kind. And is much more in the form of sort of mass surveillance and more of a privacy concern for me than the targeted surveillance of particular neighborhoods that were impacted by a disaster and are really facing extraordinary circumstances. So, you know, I'm sort of 2 minds. I think 5 more cameras would be great if we could target them on the fire-impacted neighborhoods, which is really our concern. But as it's before us tonight with putting them at the 5 busy intersections coming into town, I'm just pretty uncomfortable with that.
Councilor Hamilton?
My comment's going to be along the same lines here. I mean, my responsibility sitting up here is to represent the needs of the community, which includes the fire victims. We've received multiple emails from these individuals saying they want to have continued security in the area as they build. And I am in support of more cameras. What I'm having trouble with is the location of them, and does that meet the needs of the individuals in the burn areas? And I haven't seen sufficient data from my perspective to be able to support those locations. That's it.
Interim Chief, would you like to address the concern that you've heard in those comments?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you. I guess in short, I don't disagree with any of that. I get those concerns. I don't disagree with the concerns at all. I understand exactly what you're saying. You know, this was a measured way for us to respond to try to meet needs that we're hearing from the community, you know, as a whole. Both the people who were affected by the Marshall Fire and then just community members at large. And so we tried to combine both of those pieces of information, both those factions, and balance those to bring something that would really meet the needs of everyone. But I understand and I agree with your concerns. I get it 100%.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilor Lay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This has been really, really interesting so far. The last discussion was too. I mean, it was a little bit wrenching because at that time we have a little more distance, but it hasn't been that long. Actually, it's only been a few months. It wasn't a year ago. It was in, it looks like last fall, right? When we signed the agreement. Has it been a full year? Okay. Maybe I'm looking at,
Seems like 10.
all right, just saying anyway, or it just seemed, maybe it seems like yesterday. It's imprinted on me. All right. But a couple of things. I take your point, Mayor, about what's before us. Where I might disagree just a little bit is that because we'd be purchasing new cameras, we necessarily are kind of changing the policy a little. We're not changing certain aspects of the policy, which would continue the way they have been, but there has been, some discussion around putting it in different places kind of changes function. It changes scope. It changes the reach, for better or worse. I mean, it's just, it is a tool, but it does change policy a little bit. I do agree that if we want to go back and talk about how we use the data and the police's policy on that and so forth, that really is for another day. And that is a really important discussion, and it may be an important discussion to have. I'm not sure, we've got a lot on our plate to do right now, but I do think that's where I think it is a live policy issue. It's not just a matter of just sort of purchasing the cameras. I don't think the chief has suggested that this is just, what we're going to do is throw some money out there and things are fine. That's why he's provided so much more information, why we have so many more questions. Likewise, I think that the question of, protecting fire survivors is a really important one. I think that it's always hard to demonstrate what doesn't happen because of the existence of technology in the area. I believe that we've got professionals who study this stuff sitting in our midst and whose job it is to understand a little bit about deterrence, because that's what a lot of crime fighting policy in a city is, deterrence. We don't have time to grab every single person. It's really important for people to believe credibly that if they violate our laws, they're going to get caught and they're going to get brought to justice. But how you do that is not putting police everywhere in your city, unless we're willing to pay the price for that, and it is way too high for us. So I appreciate that the technology so far may well have prevented more theft, more crime in the burn areas. The fact that we don't see it is not proof that it didn't help us. It's just an unknown, and I'm willing to take the chief's word that it has had some deterrent effect. I think it almost can't help but have some deterrent effect. That said, I have some misgivings, although I hesitate to call this surveillance in the way that having cameras that just caught me going a little too late through an intersection in Boulder. It's not that kind of a camera. That is a different story, and it raises all kinds of additional concerns. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a camera that just registers the license plate number. I'm not saying that that's a minor thing either, and I do have concerns about the sharing of that information with a larger database. But here's, I guess, my real feeling about it. I think there's another issue, and it's really the bigger issue, not the fire survivors. It's deterrence and potentially solving crime here and elsewhere by the use of this technology through installation in other parts of the city. I think you can lay it aside that this purchase of these cameras is not designed to, nor does it probably advance the idea of solving or preventing crime in the burn areas, at least not directly. I think it raises a bigger issue, though, because there is a bigger issue in our city and across the area around theft and theft of automobiles. And I want to be clear that it's an equity concern. One of the things that has come up in the legislature, as you probably know, is we rolled back penalties and for theft of certain kinds of items of a certain value. And I think one of the things we neglected to think about is that some things of a particular value have a fundamental effect on whether you can earn a living. And maybe my car or other people's cars are more expensive and might bump you into a higher level crime than others. But for people who, particularly people who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, whose cars are not really necessarily going to be worth as much, losing that automobile to a theft is huge. It's huge. Now, that's a separate set of issues, I think. And I think it's a separate, I think it is an issue that people in Louisville care about. It may be something we want to address. I think probably the police have a whole bunch of tools in their toolkit for dealing with and analyzing theft. And that could be a very useful discussion at some point. I guess I'm persuaded a little more that purchasing these cameras and deploying them in a kind of effectively changing the policy scope a little bit, probably something I'm not too thrilled about doing right now. I think it's legitimate to raise it, and I appreciate the department raising this for us at this time. I think there is a discussion to be had that may be broader. So I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have it, that we shouldn't purchase more cameras, or that we shouldn't creep the function in a different way, but perhaps have a little bit more input into that. The final thing I would say is we're having a public discussion right now. I mean, the public has had some input. So it's perhaps we need a broader discussion, and that's kind of what I'm suggesting. But I mean, I think we've gotten some important public input on both sides now of this, and really good comments. And I really appreciate the comments all up and down the line of the dais and public here and the public who's spoken about it on Zoom. And I thank the staff for bringing this up, because this is, it's hard stuff in a way. I think it's not as hard with respect to this kind of technology as it would be with cameras that identify everything. The vehicle, the person inside, the number of people inside, and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that's really beyond probably what we need right now.
Thank you. Councilor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor. That's funny at the end, Chris. I'm like, yeah, we are having a public conversation. Like, this isn't, we're not hiding it. But, you know, I think it's interesting. I appreciate comments from my colleagues, because it's making me think about it a little bit differently. You know, I guess I was sort of under the impression we were, to your point there at the end, Chris, that we were having a conversation right now about whether we want these in these intersections or not. And I would say that the efficacy of these cameras seems to actually be better in those areas. Like they are more of a deterrent in the fire areas, but if we're actually trying to use the cameras for what their function is, which is, hey, we put a license plate on the system. Everybody in Colorado, let me know if you see that license plate. Well, our cameras aren't really placed in the right spot. They'd have to drive into a burn area for us to notice those plates. And so we aren't really an effective partner in the community of, hey, someone stole a car from Broomfield and drove it into your community. Did you see it? Like, well, I don't know. All of our cameras are pointed at construction sites. So if we need to have a separate conversation at a different later date about this topic for it to feel like Tanya said, that the community is really engaged in it and understands what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think that's fine. I think I'd be fine sort of saying, no, this sort of seems like an extension of the fire cameras, if you will. And that's not what this is. So we don't want to prove it under that guise. We want to say, no, we've got enough cameras for the fire area. If you'd like to come back for cameras for, busy intersections, that's a different concept, and we'd like to talk about that separately. I think I could be in support of that because I think that's the purpose of the cameras. And again, I'm thinking Amber Alerts for stolen vehicles or, otherwise. So I'm okay with it, with us saying no to these and then coming back later. And just from the privacy perspective, I don't have the same concerns. I think when I'm in public, I don't guard my privacy as much. So I'm driving down a road through an intersection. I assume I can be seen and monitored in lots of different ways. There are cameras at gas stations. There are cameras at, a lot of businesses. There are cameras all over the place. So once I enter the public sphere, I don't really think that like my car is a private thing that people can't know about where it is or what it's doing. And so maybe I've just become accustomed to that with all the traffic cameras and other things, and that it's just, this isn't an invasion of my privacy for my license plate number to be taken when I cross a certain line in a certain place. That doesn't feel like an invasion of my privacy. So I think that's another part of the conversation we need to have. I don't, it's a lot different than a camera that's just looking at a crowd and, investigating that crowd, if you will, or investigating the movements. Like as Tanya said, like knowing that she went to Safeway or not. Like this technology does not know where she's going, and certainly that she's buying toilet paper, right? It's an example, but like it's not like that. This technology does not do that, and so to pretend it does makes the conversation odd, right? That this is a really limited technology. And I'll just say, in Kigali here, if you drive down the road past one of their traffic cameras, they'll catch you for speeding, and 100 yards down the road, an officer will pull you over for that speeding that the camera caught, and then you'll pay the fine to that officer from your phone. You get caught, seen, caught, and then paid in a matter of about 5 minutes. And so nobody speeds in Kigali, nobody. But I don't actually see that as an invasion of my privacy. It only happens if I speed, right? If I break the law, if I do something, I get caught, and that's kind of the idea. But it's not with like tons and tons of police presence. There's just cameras noticing, activity. So I just have a different sense of the privacy of these invasion of these cameras. But to get back, if the direction of council is, hey, let's come back and have a more thorough conversation about whether or not we want more cameras in different places, and let's disconnect it from the fire situation, I'm happy to have that conversation at a later date.
Thank you. So just with, putting up a number of fingers, how many times have you gotten caught speeding since you've been there?
Twice.
Twice. Good to know.
But the highest speed limit is like 36 miles an hour, 60 kilometers. So it's tough.
Well, so I'm just going to, I think, clarify what our direction is on council. I'm not hearing support for the recommendation that staff brought forward for purchasing new cameras. So I don't think there's support for that unless someone has a disagreement with that. And what we'd have to do is someone would have to make a motion, and then we would take a vote. Yes, Councilor Lay?
I forgot one point. There was this kind of slightly separate question about the portable camera. It may be the same issue, but it is sort of qualitatively slightly different because it's aimed at a different set of issues. I don't know. I don't have enough energy around it to say, oh, we should treat that as necessarily so much different. It's probably part of the larger discussion that I was suggesting that we could have. But I did want to distinguish those because I think they have different potential impacts and a smaller, I could understand where deployed in a very targeted way, which it would necessarily have to be because it's portable. might be a slightly different matter, if anybody wants to think about that.
Interim Chief, do you have any comments on that? You can speak from right there if you like.
I guess we hadn't really considered that or thought about that. I don't know, I think the manager and I can certainly have some discussion about that to see if we want to revisit that. I didn't really come prepared to break those out, honestly, but I think it's an interesting, certainly an interesting point. I appreciate that.
All right, well, that's a valid answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The city manager, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it's the same issue because the direction from council initially was very specific. These are only for burn-affected neighborhoods. So any cameras outside of that scope is different, and we would need council direction accordingly. So that mobile camera being, if it's inside the neighborhoods, I suppose we could have already done that, but we haven't. So I think it's the same issue.
All right, thank you for the clarification. Thank you both. But I'm not seeing, enough support to move ahead with taking a vote on this item unless someone disagrees with me. But I do want to thank the interim chief of police and, the rest of the staff because I believe you listened to the community. And, as you heard, I know you were in some of those meetings where people in the burned areas were asking for more. But regardless of that, thank you for your work on this. Thank you for your candor when you were asked by council about what your thoughts on this. I think that helps sway the decision of council, and I think it's very important to get that level of input from staff. So thank you. Any last comments? Ready to move on to the next agenda item? All right, thank you. So we'll move on to regular business 7D. Ordinance number 1853, Series 2023, an ordinance approving an 11th amendment to the Centennial Valley General Development Plans, amended and restated development agreement to revise permitted uses for portion of parcel H at 972 West Dillon Road. This is the first reading to set the public hearing for May 16, 2023. So I'm making a motion to approve this. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report this evening.
Thank you. Council comments, committee reports, and identification of future agenda items. I just want to make note that we did talk about some policy things around the cameras and so forth. Next week, council will be talking about the work plan. And so, if you have some thoughts of wanting that to be considered as part of the work plan discussion, that will be an opportunity to bring that up. Other council comments, committee reports, and identification of future items. Councilor Most?
Yeah, hi. I'd like to ask the city manager to put on a future council meeting an update overall on where we are with the Marshall Fire and the programs we put in place. We put a number of programs in place, including the flock cameras. Obviously, we got some a great update on that, but we took a number of other really significant steps last year to support our community. And I would just, I'd just like to get an overall update on the different programs we put in place, sort of where we are, where our community is. We obviously have, we've seen the number of people that are rebuilding and the permits, but I'd like really an update on, how many people are building to 2018, 2021. What are we looking at in terms of size of houses and cost of houses? Because there were a lot of conversations about that. So just, kind of an overall programmatic update, what we did, where we are, what we think worked really well, maybe some places where we haven't been as effective as we might have. I think that we have to, I was speaking to the mayor earlier today about the number of catastrophes he has managed through while his time on the council. And I think the idea that we're not going to have additional traumas in this community, we're not going to have additional big problems we have to solve would be naive. So I think as much as we can learn from this one, what we did, how we've handled it, where we can make improvements, I think would be fantastic.
City Manager, you have any questions, clarifying direction?
Nope, got it. We've got June 6th, we've got that teed up, and we've been working on those very questions.
Sorry, actually today that was moved to June 20th.
So that'll be on the
June
June
20th.
20th agenda.
I just updated this morning.
Others? Other comments, agenda items? Do I see a finger over there? Now I see two fingers. Counselor Lay.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that I think our next Economic Vitality Committee meeting is going to be on Friday the 19th, I believe. And one of the things we're going to do at that meeting is take a little bit deeper dive with the business community and others who are stakeholders on the dark skies draft ordinance. So I want to just suggest, if you're interested in that, it will be in addition to the larger discussion, which I think comes in June, right? Is it June?
The first reading is July 11th, and second
Later than
reading is July 25th.
Okay. And then I have a concern that I first heard, I heard rumblings of this from some people recently about whether Excel is going to be able to sufficiently handle the load, that the electrical load that we're going to be placing on it with the construction in the burn areas, and particularly with respect to solar panels. And I know I've gotten from a couple of different people an article that discussed, I think Christian Dino was the centerpiece of that article, and I'm sure he would rather not have been the centerpiece of that article, but I'm glad there was a discussion about it. I don't know where that stands, and it's not on the agenda tonight. I sure would like to get that information, maybe even in the next council meeting, to hear from you, City Manager Durbin, just as to where that might be. If you've got anything on it now, that's fine. I just don't want to put you on the spot. It just seems like a big issue, potentially.
It is a big issue, and it's not actually formally on the agenda, but it should be.
It isn't, and I'm not asking to discuss it now. I'm just saying we should put it on.
City Manager has a comment.
Yeah, we can get you information on that. I've had conversations directly with our government liaison a couple times. Rod's staff has had a number of conversations about this as well. I've told them specifically this is something you can't fail on, and I've been assured that they are working hard on it. And I don't want to go much beyond that without doing some fact checking. So I'll get some information and ship it out to you. And if Mayor, you and I can talk about if it needs to be on an agenda or if just information purposes via email or something.
I think we should have a placeholder for May 16th.
Okay.
For this. If it can be distributed via email, that's fine too. I mean, unless we feel like we need to have a discussion, but if things are resolved, that's what we want to know, really. We want to make sure there's no impediments, or if there are impediments, if it's something that we, as policymakers, could do to change that.
Yep, and if there's some kind of information about we've got resolution, we could also include or do a separate email to all the fire impacted families, because we have that email list as well, so that they get that same information that you do. So let me check in and I'll figure out the best way to either bring it back for policy discussion or get you information.
Okay, so colleagues, I will work with the city manager on the direction, but we'll put a placeholder on May 16th for discussion if we need it. Yes, Councilor Lay.
Yeah, just one follow-up. I appreciate the city manager's comments, and I look forward to that. Perhaps Excel needs to understand that they can't fail on this. The second thing that I wanted to ask, and it's not, this is sort of a little bit out of our purview because we don't assess property values, and we don't, we don't have a lot of, relief for property taxes, and everybody's getting their notices, and it's a huge issue all across the state. We don't need to talk about that issue, but I guess one thing that I would appreciate is if there is a way maybe to put on the city website just some resources that people can click into to go to the various sites that they might need. That would be a nice public service. I don't think, we have a huge role that we can play just yet. I don't know. There may be some role that we might, but it might be nice to have that kind of information available, because there's a lot of people on fixed income that are going really, their blood pressure is going pretty high, I think. And others not, who don't have fixed incomes as well.
Yeah, so this is something that is pretty complicated. And, the states and the county, for example, has rules on how much their collection of property taxes can go up. So there are some safeguards in some places, but I got my notice and my property value went up by 50%. I don't know how that's possible, but the other thing that the Finance Committee will certainly look at when we go through the budget process is what we set our mill levies at. We basically have two, one for the general fund and one for the rec center. But we need to know what the assessed value is going to be before we can determine how we set the mill levy. But that's one of the roles of the Finance Committee, is to make a recommendation there. And so they'll be looking at it as we go through this process. But certainly my concern is the biggest portion of our property tax goes to the school district, and they don't have any limit on how much that can go up. So, yeah, but I think we can certainly put information on our site to help our residents know where to go look and how to get information. But a very small portion of property taxes is charged by the city of Louisville. Others? All right, seeing none, we're adjourned.